For almost all of the first four chapters, Hosea has addressed Israel, the northern kingdom during the divided kingdom, and her leaders about their unfaithfulness to God. The final 5 verses of the fourth chapter will address Israel, but also Judah, the southern kingdom during the divided kingdom. Welcome to Presentation, Ponder, Practice. Though you, Israel, play the harlot, do not let Judah become guilty. Judah is warned here not to prostitute themselves like Israel has, not to go to certain places known for apostasy, and not to take an oath. Israel was last mentioned in Hosea chapter 1 and verse 11. In the interim, Israel has been referred to as my people, but they'll be addressed again as Israel in chapter 7 and verse 1. Also, do not go to Gilgal or go up to Bethaven and take the oath as the Lord lives. Gilgal was a significant place in the spiritual history of Israel. It was the base of operation after going into Canaan, Joshua 4 verse 19. The first Passover in the Promised Land was held there, Joshua 5 verses 7 through 12. Gilgal was strongly connected to Samuel and Saul, 1 Samuel chapter 7 verse 16 and chapter 11 verses 14 and 15. It was strongly connected to David in 2 Samuel 19 verse 15 and some disciples of Elisha in 2 Kings chapter 4 and verse 38. Despite its importance to the nation's history, it became a center of apostasy and the people of God needed to avoid it. Amos chapter 4 verse 4 and Amos chapter 5 verse 5. Bethaven, or Bethel as it's sometimes identified, was the location of Abraham's camp in Genesis 12 verse 8. Jacob's vision found in Genesis 28 verses 11 through 18. And the place of worship that Jeroboam set up, Jeroboam the first, 1 Kings chapter 12 verse 29. Interestingly, when Jeroboam made the place a shrine to rival Solomon's temple in Jerusalem, the prophets immediately condemned the act. 1 Kings chapter 13. Through a play on words, Aven in Bethaven shows that Bethel had become a house of deception, idolatry, or wickedness. The second warning instructed the people to stay away from places of wicked influence. The third warning was to avoid oath-taking. As the Lord lives was used by heroes of faith like Boaz, Ruth 3 verse 13, and David, 1 Samuel 20 verse 3, Solomon in 1 Kings 2 verse 24, and Micaiah in 2 Chronicles 18 verse 13. Once a traditionally good thing is profaned, it's about nearly impossible to restore it to its proper use. To avoid people improperly using the oath as the Lord lives, there was this call to abandon its use completely. At the point in time when Hosea was delivering God's message to the people, Israel was so steeped in immorality, the nation's behavior was incapable of being corrected or amended. The people were stubborn, attached to idols, and their debauchery of drunkenness and promiscuity was habitual. Israel was stubborn like a cow, so God could not give them peace and prosperity because they would not go where God directed. Verse 16. In verse 17, we find that Ephraim, another way of addressing Israel, the northern kingdom, had allied with idols, being enchanted and delighted by them, basically being mesmerized. The ungodly then drank all they could, then turned to sexual activity. The last line of verse 18 is difficult to understand from the Hebrew. If the term shield is taken as an identifying name or title like it is sometimes used for God, see Genesis chapter 15 verse 1 and 2 Samuel 22 verse 3, several passages in the Psalms, then it may indicate decorative shields that were used in worship to pagan goddesses. Thus, the people loved the shamefulness that the shields represented. The wind wraps them in its wings. The wind is a metaphorical agent of affliction in verse 19. And they, the people of Israel, will be ashamed because of their sacrifices. The people would eventually be ashamed when the gods they sacrificed to would fail them. Judah should not follow Israel into apostasy and promiscuity. To avoid following in their wicked ways, Judah needed to abandon religious shrines and practices defiled by paganism. Judah could avoid being swept away and becoming sadly disappointed by the failure of their false gods if they heeded these warnings from God's prophet. For us today, we do not need to allow our house to become a house of immorality or wickedness. We must stay away from places of evil influence. We must not use the holy and sacred statements in profane ways. And if we cannot use them in proper ways, we need to abandon using them altogether. Do not become mesmerized by idols either, nor love shameful things. For when God's directions are not followed, affliction and shame will come to the disobedient. May God bless you to learn from the lessons taught to others.